Hello, and thank you for joining today's discussion. My name is Toyan Espeut. I'm the Vice President of Global Account Management and Strategy for Apptio, and I will be facilitating today's panel discussion, which is Keys to Inclusive Leadership in Your Technology Workplace. I am thrilled to have with me our esteemed panelists, and I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves in the order of my Zoom. So Julia, we will start with you.
Thank you. I'm Julia Davis. I am the EVP and Chief Information Officer for R1 RCM, which is a revenue cycle management company in the healthcare space. And I'm relatively new to the organization, coming on just pre-COVID and having to go through all that fun. And more recently had been the CIO of AFLAC, as well as divisional CIO levels in GE.
Great, thank you. And next we have Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy Eastwood, founder of E=Y. I've actually been in the technology space for over 25 years, and I've been in a myriad of roles, whether it's pre-sales, sales, R&D, support, operations, and actually my last role was the Chief People Officer of a managed service provider. I'm very passionate about people and believe that the best way to get things done is when people are engaged, and that's why I've really started this business to focus on leadership, which then drives diversity and inclusion within organizations. Glad to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Looking forward to those insights. And
great. Nice to meet everybody and good to be here on the panel. So I'm Shinnawy. I'm with Deloitte Digital. I've also been in the tech space for about 15 years, focusing primarily on marketing transformation strategy for our tech clients. And I also lead our diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings for Deloitte Digital. So glad to be here and looking forward to a very rich conversation.
Absolutely. Well, to that end, let's jump in. So, the first topic I wanted to put to the floor here was just, in your experiences, what are the advantages of diverse teams in technology-focused organizations? We'll start with Kathy. Kathy, you have an interesting perspective, having worked across many functions of the enterprise in your roles in the past. Share with us what you think.
Yeah, so when I look at an organization, there's really, when it comes to people, it's three main levers that you're looking at, right? Is people staying, to the retention, how productive the teams are, and how innovative. And so when I look towards technology companies, technology roles in an organization, innovation is so important, right? You're constantly solving problems. You need to have a growth mindset to think out of the box, to do things more automated and streamlined. And diversity has been proven to really be able to drive successful problem solving and growth within organizations, because when we all think the same, we're not thinking out of the box and coming up with different ideas. So that's how I've seen the diversity so important in any organization, but especially in technology. And I think, Ahmed, you have some interesting points where it's not just on, whether it's, culture or sex, it's cognitive. So, yeah.
Thank you, Kathy. You bring up a really good point that, it's really important to always try and find that common denominator for where we're all starting, about defining what diversity truly is. Others can think of it as just gender or race, background, religion, you name it. But I think it goes a lot beyond that. And at Deloitte specifically, we started defining diversity more in the sense of a representation of who we really are as a culture, as a community, as innovators in the tech space with our clients and so forth. We don't necessarily prioritize a specific group or a specific thought. It's truly the full representation of who we are and how we come together.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed, I can say in my career, and we've all been through those assessments as an organization where you start to look at, what does the group think look like? And too often in IT, I come into an organization and I discover not only do we all look alike, we all think alike. And so part of the challenge I found is that you can have huge gaps in your organizational thought process if you're all skewed in one direction. I think we've all done the DISC surveys. There's an awful lot of high Ds in organizations. The whole Myers-Briggs process, we've all been through that. the diversity of thought is an important element to look at. And I know as I went through that process, when I was last in AFLAC, I discovered I was lacking in innovation and strategy. Well, for IT, that's a huge thing that you need as part of a leadership team, is to make sure it's not just focused on execution and delivery, but also or operations and compliance, but that you're also focused on strategy and innovation.
Absolutely. All excellent points. And that kind of takes us to the next part of the conversation, which is around, you know, this sort of tendency to default to old patterns. And, you know, when you think about recruitment, you tend to go to what's familiar, what you know, and that can result in this sort of homogenous environment, you know, and not really driving the diversification that's going to bring the innovation and the competitive advantage. So what has worked for you in terms of some strategies that have helped you change that paradigm? Let's start with Julia, because you've had some interesting experiences at AFLAC, I know, in getting really creative with sourcing talent. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think too often I kept hearing there's not enough diversity in technology. You don't get women in technology. Of course, being a woman in technology, I was like, well, no, I don't think so. They're out there. But part of it is being open to it and looking for it. Same thing from a diverse candidate perspective. What does your pipeline look like? It's for us, we had to go back and look at from where we bring people on right out of college and what were we targeting? Well, we found that we were not looking at diverse schools in colleges in the South. And being in a small town South, you want to recruit from people that are more likely to stay there and want to live there. And there are a lot of opportunities that outside the normal patterns that you got to start to focus on. Look at programs that start with kids in high school. That was another thing we got actively engaged in, was the local robotics organization, and making sure that as a woman, I was representing 2 younger women in high school and in junior high to say, look, Girls Who Code, great program. There are ample opportunities that you could leverage to support that pipeline and start to build it, and make sure that you're getting the candidates in. And then even more importantly, you're putting programs in place to start to make sure you retain them. Because that's another challenge, is you're going through the retention process. What are you doing to make sure that you actively are promoting candidates who are of diverse background, that making sure that they're included in part of the slate and part of that process, and getting people to focus more on not just who they're comfortable with, but who also challenges them and also might help lead to getting a better cross-section of candidates.
Absolutely. And just to unpack that a bit, you talked about something that's really important, which ties to the retention. And if you're retaining diverse talent and those individuals are having a really positive career experience, they become your best ambassadors to continue the recruitment process and bring other networks of diverse talent to the table. Ahmed, I'd love to hear your contrasted perspective, because working for a very large organization like Deloitte, you have some wonderful programs that tackle this. Why don't you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's such an interesting time to even have these discussions, just given what's going around us in the country and all the events that are taking place. And I often get the question of, so there's a big push for diversity and inclusion, and it's being a buzz right now at the moment. Am I supposed to prioritize that over qualified candidates? Why and why not? What about qualified candidates? Why would they not get a fair representation or a fair opportunity? And that's really the wrong question to ask, in my opinion. It's about being conscious of your own decisions. As human beings, generally we have the tendency to go through shortcuts, and that typically relies in implicit bias or unconscious bias. So you kind of go to what is familiar to you, what has worked in the past. And really the conversation now is changing that dynamic of being more conscious, putting in the effort. Do I have the right team? Do I have the right construct? As well as the right qualifications, of course. In no way we're trying to prioritize one versus the other. This is truly about being conscious what your decisions are. How does your team come together when it comes to recruitment, staffing, retention, promotions, and so forth? And definitely, like Julia mentioned, the data is really important there, because it does inform you of where you are currently and what your vision should be and heading towards.
Absolutely. And you're talking about intentionality, right? And being very focused and purposeful in how you approach it. And you brought up another point about data, which is certainly You know, when I think about us being in the tech community, we are data-driven people. And Julia, I've often heard you create this linkage of that, you know, as being synonymous with TBM and our focus around data. Why don't you share that?
Absolutely. You know, being a data-driven person, that's just the nature. I think that comes from the Six Sigma background, the days of GE, but it's one of those things that I think is very fact-based. It takes a lot of the emotion out of it. And I can honestly say that in every job I've come to as a CIO, and I've been a CIO for 20 years, I always find the same thing in the data. The data tells the story, and it tells me, unfortunately, we don't focus on diversity. We don't leverage what we're learning, that maybe we're not doing the right thing, that the candidates are there, they exist in the pipeline, we're just not giving them the opportunity. And when you unpack that and you start to look at why, it's natural inclination. People are more inclined to want to hire people that they know, or that they're more like them, that they're more likely to talk to. And too often than not, you'll see people cluster and gravitate together based on commonality. And that's part of the process we had to go through, is going through that training and education process, particularly making sure people were aware that they were having this unconscious bias towards some of their decision making, and focusing instead on how do you think outside the box. How do you look for that candidate that's really going to fill the gaps that are in your organization, because we all have them, and making sure that you're making that effort to look beyond your usual approach for how you handle staffing, hiring, promotions, all of that. And in some cases, it's starting to put in the guidelines to people to make standards that say, okay, you're going to have a diverse candidate on the slate for hires. You're going to have a diverse candidate on the slate for promotions. And eventually it starts to become a self-fulfilling. When we started out with our internship program, we had less than 2% diverse candidates. By the time I left, it was 50%. That was not a target. It was just something that was achieved through people paying more attention to the process, more attention to the outcome. And as a result, we got a better spate of candidates that we wound up hiring, most of them out of the internship program into the leadership program, the entry-level leadership program. And it was a great feeder system for our whole system throughout the life cycle, as they now go through the process of getting promoted into management 5 years later.
That's fantastic. And Kathy, I would imagine as a chief people officer and people leader in past lives, you have a pretty strong perspective here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll never forget at one of the companies I was at, one of the first things I did was bring the data to the table, right? What does the diversity numbers look like? How are we doing? And the response back was, why are we even measuring this? I hire the best. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's just interesting that I knew they had the right intent, but they were definitely thinking about it from, hey, I'm good. And it's kind of what Ahmed was saying, where, you know, it's unconsciously, they don't realize the impact. And they were going to the well. They knew where they went. They hired and they thought they were hiring the best, but they weren't seeing the rest. So that was when the first metric I put in was actually measuring the pipeline. You know, Julia, to your point, right? So what does it look like? Do you have a diverse pipeline of candidates? I do not promote saying that you have to hire for diversity. You want to hire the best person, but if you bring enough people forward that are diverse, you will end up coming up with the right numbers. And then it's about throughout the whole life cycle, right? So it's about attracting is first and foremost, and then it really is about retaining and making sure you're retaining people by promoting them and throughout the process.
Well said. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, this concept of inclusivity and where organizations are falling short and where we as leaders in the tech community are seeing gaps. Let's call out those behaviors and kind of talk about, you know, what we need to do to drive improvement. I mean, one natural area that I certainly see and can speak to is just the underrepresented minority community, particularly in senior leadership roles. You can extend that to veterans. I know, you know, Julia, you have a very strong passion there for the veteran community. You know, I think about the breadth of the neurodiverse community, you know, and you can kind of take that even further with other circumstances, whether it be single parents who are trying to straddle work-life balance. It is so broad. So what are some of the things that we're seeing there where we aren't showing up well as organizations, and what can we focus forward on doing differently? I'll throw this out to the group, so whoever would like to jump in. Don't be shy.
Sure.
Well, I can start. I mean, I guess again, from what can we do? It's part of it's the self-awareness. And honestly, it wasn't that the team was deliberately trying to be this way, thankfully. What I found was they weren't really aware that how they were viewing or what they were looking for. And they had to rethink that criteria. One of the interesting things that we discovered is we would look at people's scores. And a lot of people were scoring people really highly, diverse candidates really highly, but the diverse candidates weren't necessarily going out there and asking for the promotions, whereas other people, were traditionally, the white males were going and asking for it, and so they were being considered for it. Whereas other people were just, they're doing their job, they expect to get noticed. So it was changing that dynamic that you need to take better control of your own career as well in order to ask for that next opportunity. And it's amazing when we open up that dialogue to start to tell folks as well, it's not just you'd expect your manager to do this, you've got to reach out as well. It's a two-way street to make sure that you're pushing your own career as well, to ask for those opportunities, to take the things that are outside your comfort zone that will stretch you and give you the opportunity to grow. And then of course, on the flip side, still reminding management, be open to it. Let people come in.
Yeah, and I think, Julia, when you talked about that awareness, I think it's so important because most of us have a tendency, is that bias, or that, everyone thinks the way we think, but women think very differently because of experiences we've had throughout our career traditionally, and we may not speak up. Or, I'll tell you, when you look at a resume, a woman will typically look at a resume and see there's 10 items on it, and they'll go down to that last bullet of the last thing and go, oh, I can't do that. I'm not going to put myself forward for this position. Where someone that might have more confidence will say, oh, I can do one thing, so I'm going to go for it. And unless you intentionally understand how people approach things, you may not go out of your way to pull them into the conversation. And I had the opportunity to be present in front of President Justin Trudeau when he took over, and he was aiming to have a cabinet that was representative of his population. And he thought that it would be so easy. Oh, this is going to be fantastic. As long as I open the positions up, they will come and I'll fill them quickly. But he found that he really had to go out of his way to invite people in and convince them that they could do the job, because that just wasn't their natural tendency. So the amount of work to get there, to get that representation was really difficult. So I think as leaders, we have to step out of what we're comfortable with and make sure we're listening and hearing how other people think, feel, act, engage, because it's all different.
That's right. It's really creating that space for people to feel like, hey, I can be successful here. I have supporters. I can grow my career, right? It's not necessarily, in some cases, it could be a confidence level with the individual. In others, it might be, is this a safe space, right, for me to be able to step out there and be my authentic self and to be received by the company, depending upon the corporate culture.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and I'll build on Kathy. It's such a very enriching example. Just thinking the Prime Minister of Canada with that authority, and still going through the trouble of being able to meet those expectations that he set out to do. So we typically say on the Deloitte side, diversity and inclusion. Diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance, and they're very different. And in so many cases, we're trying to do a lot more than get the conversation going and raise awareness. We're actually moving, if not already, officially to make diversity and inclusion initiatives part of performance review, and instilling that accountability that, long gone the days where you say, yes, I am supportive of diversity and inclusion, and that sounds fantastic. Well, what are you doing about it? What are you bringing to the table? Whether you are leading something or supporting someone, it's not an option not to be involved anymore.
Exactly.
And I think it's interesting because I think inclusion is so important. I guess I feel that diversity comes along once you get inclusion right. So you have to invite enough people to the table, but I think if you can get inclusion right, and people want to stay, then they're going to be inviting in others, right? And say, yep, this is a safe environment. This is where you want to be. And then people are going to stay. And I think, you know, if you look at some websites, that's the first thing I do. And I look at their board. Is it a diverse board? Because I may not engage with them, you know, and it starts to become a competitive advantage as well. So something to be thinking about.
So speaking of that, how do we start to think about promotion of candidates in creating a more diverse group of leaders within an organization? What are some of the, you know, qualities or attributes that are really relevant today for the, you know, changing dynamic of the workforce and what that composite looks like? What are some of those traits that we really should be fostering in future leaders? Let's start with Kathy. We'll start with you. We'll go to Ahmed and then round out with Julia.
I think it's the personal and human qualities that you need to be looking at in leaders, right? There was a time that everyone thought it's all business, but it's not anymore, right? The boundaries have blurred. It's all personal, right? So you need leaders that understand, you know, and carry those qualities around. Awareness, I think, is probably the number one quality that a leader needs to have. Authenticity, you know, empathy. So the ability to listen and hear and include people and understand those differences. Because yes, you can learn some of the technologies, you can learn processes, but if you can't learn how to interact with people, I think you're always going to be behind the curve.
I agree. Definitely, I'll build on empathy and I'll add ability to change behavior. You know, I think it used to be the case, like you mentioned, Kathy, that, you know, leaders, you would just be looking for someone with a clear vision, but that doesn't cut it anymore. Empathy is really important because it does enforce, in a way, the type of culture that you're instilling in the organization, how you want your clients and everybody in the market to see you and observe the type of organization you are, as well as being able to respond in an agile manner to current events. You know, no matter how small or big your organization is, now the expectation is you need to be very proactive in responding to what's happening around you in the environment. So they definitely both go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, for me, I think one of the things that we're very good about in IT is we tend to focus on education and training. We focus on tech training. We don't focus on the soft skills training. And that's probably the biggest aspect of what I found having to work with my leaders is just, hey, it's not just about telling people how to do things, or making sure the checklist is getting done. It's, are you asking them how their day is going? Are you asking them how they're feeling about current events? Are you truly engaged with them on a personal level to understand what are the factors that are influencing perhaps whether they're having a good or a bad day? It's connecting with them in more than just the workplace environment, because I think that's what this generation, especially millennials coming in and the new kids coming in, it's very different from those of us that are boomers who was just like heads down, go straight to work. A very different world. And so I personally found I had to incorporate getting on my leadership team someone at a much more junior level so I could connect. I didn't understand the same issues and challenges they were facing. And I had to have them teach me things like Instagram. You know, it's like trying to connect, make sure I'm being kept current and I'm keeping up to date. And we as leaders have a responsibility to open up our borders and start to look across and constantly keep growing. And so for me, for my leadership team, it was important that they actually start to pay attention to those soft skills and encourage that and get a little bit more training in that, because that didn't come naturally to people. Typically in the technology, it's all, you know, facts and data. And so that was a change for a lot of folks, but it's a necessary change to make people more well-rounded and be able to grow and experience what inclusion means and understand that some of the subtle things they were doing might have an effect on other people in their department.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's interesting. And if I can just follow up on that, Julia. So I was meeting with a bunch of tech leaders last night, and we were talking about leadership skills and what's happening. And we were coining it that we're going into a new different, right? Everyone has been trying to say that we're going into a new norm with COVID and, you know, all the racial issues that we've been having and things like that, but it's not a norm. You know, this is different and we all have to be thinking differently. And now with technology that people are able to work remote and more people are, it's really, you have to go out of your way and do things differently to engage your team. So there were 8 of us sitting around the Zoom, I'll say around the table, but around the Zoom last night. And we stopped and asked each one of them, how are you feeling? And it's the first time they had stopped to think, oh, I got to tell, and it was a chance for them to admit, oh, this is really tough. This is hard. I don't know how to do this with my, and just having that outlet, they were like, oh, this feels good. Oh, wait a minute, I need to be doing this with my teams because my team needs the outlet. And someone, it was a profound statement that someone had, which, and kind of your mind starts to blow when you think beyond this. Suddenly switching companies now is so much easier, right? It's going to be as easy as I'm changing my IP and I'm logging in over here to a whole different company. Now keeping employees is going to be critical, and you have to have more empathy. You have to be more inclusive. You have to be thinking about how people are feeling and have very deliberate conversations, because you're not going to get that body language of that person slumping in the conference room, not sitting up at the table and going, oh, wait, something's wrong. What's happening? And you have to figure out new ways to do it.
The whole reading the virtual room now.
Exactly.
It's very different, true. And I think the other piece to it you touched on, which I want to double click on, is as leaders, when we're having successes and connecting and trying new things, we've got to bring that back to our other peer leaders and say, listen, I did something different and here's what it unlocked in the way of some creative thinking, a new dialogue, you know, or even just in my own ability to be able to increase my capacity, right, to do more. I think those lessons, we don't just have to convey those working with our direct teams for those who report to us, but we have to message that up into our peer leadership as well to say, and if you do, here's the net gain. I think that becomes really important as well. So, you know, let's kind of pivot to, you know, thinking about if there were, I'll call it a key takeaway or like one thing that you would recommend to leaders within the community to say, you know what, if we're going to get this right, make sure you're doing more of this, or make sure we stop doing X. What would that be? Ahmed, we'll start with you.
3 things, in my opinion: intention, intention, and intention. We tend to fall back as human beings to our old ways, naturally shortcuts, being a little bit lazy. Intention takes effort, and it's not easy in a day and age where everything is a click and a swipe and a Snapchat and a TikTok. You need to do a lot more in terms of being accountable, being authentic, being honest with yourself, letting your behavior influence others to set an example in that sense. Unless you're truly intentional with your actions, it's going to be more of a what we call a check the box, and it loses its true value.
So true. So true. Julia, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I look at your data, look at your metrics. We all have it. Every time I've gone into a CIO role, they always tell me the same story. Every single time it's the same story. And you can do something about it. You can make a conscious intention to improve. You don't have to set a target or a benchmark or a number, but at least improve and focus on improving the actions that you need to take to improving. Look around the room at your leadership team. Do they all express their opinions and ideas comfortably? Or do they just nod their heads and agree with everything you're saying? You got to get people in there to challenge you as well. It's not about, you know, just blindly agreeing with leadership. It's about, you want that innovation, that creativity, and the people to participate in that process. And a lot of that comes from starting to think, maybe I need to think about how to do things differently. And I know that was one of the biggest lessons I had to learn as I took one of those many tests, and I quickly learned I like to hire people just like myself. And I quickly learned a room full of people like me is horrible. We're all focused on one outcome, which is success at all costs, not necessarily a good equation for a good team. And it was a conscious effort I had to make in getting self-aware about the fact that I needed to start to focus on diversifying my organization from a variety of perspectives. And that's what takes self-awareness on our part as leaders, to really look at the data and act on it. Those are the recommendations I have.
Great
Yeah,
points.
and I'll build on that, right? So the intention, I think, is critical, having the data, and then I think it's having the courage to have the conversations and being really open on those dialogues. So I've been working with a lot of folks now, a lot of leaders, to actually put explicit teaming agreements in, is what we're calling them. Because I had a situation where I nearly quit a group I was part of because my voice wasn't being heard. And I had the courage to go to the leader and say, hey, here's the situation. I really felt left out. And I knew that wasn't his intent. It just so happened. And so we had a very open dialogue. And I said, listen, I need feedback. I need to know that you're hearing me. Well, that started a whole dialogue with the whole group, and others felt the same way. And so, that leader said to me also, hey, you have to be accountable too. If you don't feel like you're being heard, it's your responsible to step up. So sometimes just really sitting down and creating that open dialogue. And that's why I like the teaming agreements, where it's a little more official, but it puts it all on the table to sit down among your peers and your team and understand, okay, what do you like? What don't you like? A simple question as to what's your preference in communications, emails, texts, phone, what is it? When you learn that just about your own team, you can help them feel like, oh, you care about me, to know I hate text messages because that's how my child, asks me things. I prefer to pick up the phone and call me. You'll get a much better response. Those kind of explicit dialogues really take the intention and help move it that much further along, so that everyone feels like they're being appreciated, they're being heard, and they're part of the group.
That's wonderful. Are any other topics that we didn't cover that you think are really germane to the conversation that we should put on the table before we conclude our discussion today? We've covered a lot of ground.
I think we have.
I think the key is it's conversation. I think the fact is, you just can't say this is another HR initiative that's being thrust upon me, and partner with your HR. That I know that's typical for a lot of people in IT to do. We're very much non-emotional types typically, but it's been important for me to make a difference in my organization, and to see my retention rates go up and see my diversity rates go up. It was critical that I made those a working relationship and partnership with my HR organization to help me get there. Include them as part of your team. They're not the enemy. They're actually there to help you and help you build out that type of organization that you want going forward.
Great point.
Yeah, no, there's so many different things, and I'm sure, Ahmed, you have a ton of them, of what you're doing with the teams in Deloitte. One thing that I had done within the last organization, I would do meetings with one of the minorities. And then I would invite someone in that became a minority for the first time ever in their lives, right? So I did it in India, and I had a meeting with all the women, and I had one gentleman got to join in. And then he presented back at the town hall afterwards. And I was like, how did it feel to be the only one at the table? He was like, yeah, that was weird. I said, well, welcome. This is what we feel like on a, regular basis. And I think it's important that people feel what it's like to not be the majority in a situation. And if you've ever been in a room as the only extrovert with a whole bunch of introverts, you can feel that as well, because that's me, right? I'm just very outgoing, and I've learned to respect then the introverts on how they feel, and I have to ask 3 times to get their input into something. And so I think, just being aware of where you are in the majority or the minority in any situation, I think is so important. That's how you can include others.
Absolutely. It's not a destination, it's a long journey. You don't change a culture in a day or with a conversation or a training. It takes all hands on deck to understand that the journey is long, but it's worth it. And we're only at the initial steps.
And you said something I loved in the beginning, Ahmed, where you said it's about being asked to dance, right? Is that, did I get the phrase right?
Diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance.
And it's never too late to get on the dance floor. Right. And I've had that. Some people feel like, oh, maybe I'm late to the party and I don't even know how to, you're never too late. Just join in and start dancing.
Start dancing. Well said. Well, I really sincerely appreciate all of your input, your insights, just the experiences that you bring to this discussion are so valuable. And I know that our audience does as well. So thank you for taking the time to join the conversation. Apptio itself is on our first year of putting a formal D&I pillar into our corporate objectives. So that's an exciting step for us. You know, we're all learning. And as we're continuing to evolve that and grow, there'll be a lot of good lessons learned and idea exchange. So let's keep it going. And we wish you all continued success in your individual endeavors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.